So good morning, everyone. It's Friday and it's really early morning. We've still got the sun not even quite up yet, and I really wanted to get up as early as I could today because I don't want to waste 1 second of this day. I have a lot of ideas about my writing and I've been saving them up for today, hoping that I would wake up feeling inspired, which sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't, and it's never an excuse not to write. But I've been sort of keeping notes the whole week towards today, making a lot of notes, doing a lot of writing about the writing and a lot of, thinking about the writing. I've also been reading a couple of books. I've probably read in my lifetime well over 100 or 150 books about writing, maybe even more. And I've recently bought a couple more books by writers who focus a lot on structure. I've always felt that structure is one of the areas that I could understand better. I've always worked intuitively as a writer and kind of allowed structure to emerge, and it's always worked. But I sometimes think that maybe there's a little hack, maybe there's a little way in which I could learn how to work structurally more consciously, because I'm really interested in the way the brain works and the way storytelling works on the brain of the reader. And so the reason I've probably been able to do it intuitively before is because I've kind of followed the internal direction of how story needs to work. But there really is a kind of internal structure to a story, a kind of an architecture to a story. Even if you're writing memoir, there is a way in which you want to take a reader on a particular journey. And there are emotional triggers and emotional turning points that you can structure quite consciously into a story. Now, I never start off by planning a story. It's just not my way. I know that there are writers that say, this is the best way to work and you save a lot of time, and I'm really happy for them. I'm envious of them. For me, a lot of writing begins with exploration and a kind of very broad mulling around some questions that are worrying me, or questions that I would like to try and answer for myself. So it takes me a while to get to the structure part. I like to work with chaos first, and then I like to order the chaos. I'm not saying it's like the best way to work. It just happens to be the way that I work, and it's the way I know, and it's the way that I trust because it's worked for me before. And also because I feel like a lot of unconscious material comes to the surface when you work that way. When you are structuring, that's very conscious, that's very logical, it's very left brain. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, I think you absolutely need that part of yourself in the writing, and it becomes more and more important as you are working into structure and an outer plot, as well as, actually, interestingly enough, an inner emotional journey. Because even though we think of emotion as unstructured, emotion is not unstructured. Emotion has got an architecture, and we need to think about the architecture of emotion when we are writing. What is the architecture of anxiety? How does it manifest and how does it resolve? Because clearly, if you're taking readers on a journey, you want that emotion to somehow morph into something different at the end. So you've got to understand how, for example, anxiety works, on the body. You've got to understand how anxiety works, in the human mind. You've got to understand how anxiety in one character is going to impact on relationships around her. And you've also got to understand how you might resolve anxiety, how anxiety could be resolved. So all of these are quite structural in a way. And so I teach emotion, as I call it structuring emotion. You've got to understand what are the component parts. And also if your aim is to make your readers feel the anxiety of your character, there is a structure to doing that as well. There are storytelling techniques that will allow you to help your reader feel what your character's feeling. So anxiety has got to do with a lack of control, or a sense of not knowing something, or a sense of not being able to control your own emotions, kind of a raised heart rate. So there are ways of doing that in the writing so that your reader will also experience those same things, that sense of not being sure, that sense of uncertainty, that sense of foreboding, that sense of anxiety. Whatever your reader, your character is feeling, you want to allow that emotion to be filtered into your reader, so that your reader is hooked in emotionally into what is happening for the character. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been thinking sorry, I'm just looking down here because I've been making a heap of notes the last couple of days. I've done a lot of work around the writing, which is what you'll start to find happens. So I've made these big long tables about what each character is wanting, because the very important thing about a story that keeps a reader hooked into the story is that your reader has got to be rooting for your character. And so your character has got to be trying to achieve something. So this is normally talked about as, your character's got to have a goal, or what does your character want? And I see a lot of writers that I mentor, they kind of struggle with really nailing this down. And I was wondering why we struggle so hard to work out what a character wants. And it struck me perhaps because a lot of us in our own lives don't know what we want. It's very hard to make somebody else want something if you don't know what you want, or if you don't have sort of your own clarity around goals, which is why when I teach, I do this crossover between what I call consciousness and craft. Whatever's showing up in the writing is showing up in your own life. It's not a function of the writing. It's not because you haven't thought things through enough for your character. It's often because that somehow is manifesting in our own lives, and we have to resolve that in ourselves before we can kind of transplant it into a character. Otherwise, it's just going to feel pretentious. It's just going to feel you can't make your character feel something that you have never felt. You can't be writing about a particular emotion that you yourself have never experienced. We're always writing from emotion, right? So if you have never hungered for something, and if you are not fighting in your own life for something emotionally, it doesn't have to be, we're not talking about like social justice, we're not talking about any of these big causes, but every single person is fighting for something. We're all fighting for it, whether it is for visibility, whether it is for our voice, whether it is for our health, whether it is for happiness, whether it is to be free of anxiety, whether it is to get over something that we've lost. We're all fighting for something. And it's in here that the real hook of our character lies. What is your character fighting for? I feel like that's a much stronger question than simply asking, what does your character want? A want can be, a very small thing, and often you can start writing by, your character wants a glass of water, or your character wants to find their lost wallet. You can always start with that, and sometimes it's useful to start with something small, because really what that's going to ultimately end up being is a metaphor for something much bigger that the character has lost or needs to find or is after, right? So I spent a lot of time writing into this, because what I'm saying to you is it's not actually such a quick and easy question to answer. If you don't, it's not an easy, quick question to answer. So I've been wondering, what does my character want? What does she want? What does she want? What does she want? What is she fighting for? And saying, she just wants, to be happy or live a contented life is just not enough of a story, because that's just not going to make anyone want to carry on reading. It's got to be something really, it's got to be a driving force inside of her. So I think, having done a lot of writing around it, and I've looked at, what all my different characters want, because you've got to also have, push them up against each other. That's where you get conflict, right? So my character, obviously, she desperately wants to connect with her daughter, who is disappearing from her emotionally. And of course, what the daughter wants is for her mother to leave her alone, right? So they're already have set up a really good basis for some conflict. My character also wants to protect her children from bad things happening. And of course what that is all, everything that your character's fighting for, everything that your character wants is going to be, the root of that is going to be found in the backstory, in what happened before the story begins. Why has your character got such a compulsion around this particular thing? Well, that will be revealed, because this is what we do when we write. We're revealing character, and our structure is revealing what is going on for our characters. So there's going to be a moment in the backstory where she didn't protect her children, right? She wasn't able to, and in this particular story, it's because her daughter's boyfriend has died. Her daughter's boyfriend has died of an overdose, and she picked up that there was something wrong, that he was struggling, and she flagged it for her daughter, and her daughter told her to butt out. It was none of her business, and she'd got it wrong, and now the daughter has lost her boyfriend, and she's failed to protect her daughter. She's actually failed. The one thing that matters to her the most in the whole world is to protect her children from pain and suffering. She's failed at doing that. So what do you do when you fail at doing the one thing that you really feel you need to do? Well, you will overcompensate. You're going to start behaving in a kind of crazy, kind of mad way to overcompensate for this thing that you have failed to do, even though it obviously is a completely unrealistic goal, to protect other people from the pain and the suffering of life. So of course at some point she's going to have to realize that this is an absolutely ridiculous goal. It's not feasible, and she's going to have to let go, and she's going to have to learn to trust her daughter. So she thinks her daughter is grieving, and that's where her mistaken belief is, that she thinks her daughter's grieving, and she feels guilty because she didn't stop the bad thing from happening, and all of that's going to be rooted in her backstory. So I've got to find a time in her life where she did stop a bad thing from happening, and therefore felt like it was her responsibility always to stop bad things from happening. So I haven't quite worked out what that is, but I've got to, maybe today I'm going to work into that question. What happened in her past where she stopped something bad from happening, and therefore in her child's mind assumed that now this was her job to stop bad things from happening, and also gave her that omniscient fantasy that in fact she could stop bad things from happening. So her daughter, of course, feels guilty because her mother flagged this thing that her boyfriend was struggling. Her mother saw it, tried to say, listen, does he need help? And the daughter's like, it's none of your business. Everything is under control. It's fine. Just leave us alone. I don't need you to be, micromanaging my relationship. I don't need you to be micromanaging my life. Things are under control. But of course, that didn't work out. So she now feels, completely guilty, and also hates her mother for the fact that her mother saw the thing that she didn't see, and that her mother was right. It's very complex when your mother is right. Extremely complex when your mother happens to be right about things. So there's a great deal of tension that I can set up between these two characters. So she wants to get away from her mother, but her mother convinces her to come with her to Italy, and I've worked out why she would actually agree to go when she doesn't really want to be around her mother, and it's got to do with the fact that earlier on, this was what I worked out last week, that when she was 15, she was about to go to Italy on exchange. She'd spent 3 years learning Italian, she was ready to go, and then she got viral meningitis, 2 days before she was due to leave, and she missed out on this trip to Italy. So then she stopped eating pasta, and she stopped learning Italian, and she kind of was like, that's gone, that dream is gone, bad things always happen to me. So that's her story. The daughter's story is that bad things, happen to her. And of course now with her boyfriend, what's happened with her boyfriend, that story has been reinforced. So that's the journey she's got to go on. The daughter is to realize that bad things don't always happen to you, and that you're not responsible for these things. And she's got to kind of come to a place of hopefulness about the world. And I've pitched this at a time just before Trump becomes elected. So it's at a very precarious time in the world when young people are struggling for hope. So it's a kind of a tricky landscape that I've painted here. And one of the things that I'm going to think about a lot is I'm going to think about, bodies. I write a lot about bodies, and I write about mothers and daughters and their bodies, and bodies as landscapes and landscapes as bodies, and thinking about the way in which stories happen in our bodies. So how does a story manifest in the body? How does the emotion of guilt, how does the emotion of responsibility, how does it manifest in our bodies? When I think of a responsible body, I think of a kind of a woman in her 50s, a woman whose body has really borne the brunt of the world. It's a body that's carried, it's a body that's sacrificed, it's a body that's been there. It might be a body that's lost a breast, it might be a body that's lost a uterus, or is scarred. It's certainly weighed down with life. And then you think of, and yet that's the body that's going to be the hopeful body. And then there's the young daughter who's got this perfectly beautiful, pert, young, innocent, untouched body. It's, it doesn't have much of an appetite, the daughter, so she's a little bit on the skinny side, and the mother's trying to kind of entice her with food. Food is always a big theme for me. But that's the body that is really kind of losing hope. It's the body that's disappearing. And I'm very interested in this idea of, how these bodies act as landscapes, and how emotion sits in the body, and how I want that young body to move from being one that is, as a lot of these beautiful young bodies are, self-hating, self-abnegating, in a kind of starvation mode. Even if they're not sort of physically starving themselves, there's a way in which our young girls are like emotionally starving. They're starving in a way that really worries me. It really worries me. And I think that a lot of the hope for the future lies in the bodies of our generation, women in their 50s and their 60s and their 70s, the wise souls, the bodies that have sacrificed, the bodies that have been there. They are the ones that are going to bring these young bodies back into a hopeful landscape, despite the fact that Trump is about to be elected. In the face of that, there is still hope. So, got a lot of work cut out for me today and in the coming months, but that's kind of a little bit of a landscape into my process for the day. So I hope that that's kind of interesting. And if you're having a writing day today or anytime soon, I hope that it's a rich one. Bye.